fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back. Got my bro Luke, got Wyatt, got Tony. I think we're still, Wyatt really wants to call this Tackle Tuesday, but we're actually recording this on a different day. We won't say what day. What do you guys think? You guys have to guess in show notes. Closest person gets, I don't know, maybe a free PDF Flounder cheat sheet or something. Ooh, what's an eye? So speaking of Flounder, that's what this whole episode is about. Wyatt recently did a video on best Flounder lures, in particular, best lures to go catch those big old doormats. If you don't know what a doormat is, it means you probably never caught a flounder before. Doormat is a monster flounder. Depending on where you live, might depend on how big that might have to be. But you know when you see a doormat, it looks like just something that barely fits on the camera. And that video, like, you know, and just so you guys know, with our YouTube channel, we have 140,000 subscribers now on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, come on, what are you waiting on? Please help us out. And normally, we know we'll get a few thousand views in a short amount of time. Let's just say 24, 48 hours on just kind of an average video. And that one, before even 24 hours had hit, already had, was it 20,000 or close to it? You guys remember?
Look it up. Yeah. It was over 20,000. 20,000
and in less than 24 hours. Anytime we see that, we're like, all right, what we study it, right? Just like anybody should. If something does well, you study what happened and what went well. What did people like about it? What was so shareable about it? And a lot of it was just the flounder in general. Obviously, you're talking about big flounder and you got lures. And so we looked at some of our past best performing blog posts as well. And a lot of it had to do with flounder. And I think one reason we haven't focused on it enough is, you know, Luke and I started this whole Salt Strong family and this whole movement, this club, you know, in Tampa, really on, you know, the west coast of Florida. And West Coast, I don't know many people that target flounder, meaning we all love catching them, but it's just tough to like go out there and say, hey, I'm only going to catch flounder today. Not many people do it. Even when we did that flounder course, it was tough to find like a flounder expert on the west coast of Florida. Now, once you get into Texas, and in that range, I mean, they have like, it's like a whole different country. I mean, they love flounder. They're gigging them. They're doing all kinds of stuff with them. But it was really weird on the West Coast. And then once we started moving over on a lot of the East Coast of Florida, then moving up all the way up to New Jersey, we realized that, like, man, people are crazy about flounder, or AK fluke, up in New Jersey, you know, Rhode Island, New York, that whole area. I guess that's all you have to do up there is be cold and go catch flukes. So anyhow, we wanted to do a podcast all about flounder. And we're going to talk about the where to find them. We're going to talk about the when, like, you know, best times of year, best tides, etc. We're going to talk about the what. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the lures and even the live baits, and then talk about, you know, how to bring it all together, how to use it. So Wyatt, you want to kick it off since that was your post? What are your thoughts on catching flounder?
Yeah. So in you know, areas that there are more flounder, you guys are in the Gulf, like you mentioned, there's not a high population of them. But in areas like Texas, the Carolinas, even upper northeast regions of Florida, like Jacksonville, flounder are a great species to target because I personally believe they're the easiest to locate and they're one of the more aggressive inshore species. So if you can get a lure in front of them in the right spot and it has the right profile, you know, in the right time of year, like 90% of the time, you can get those fish to strike. If there's one fish I'm confident and able to go out and find and catch, it's flounder, just because they're so easy to pattern in and their time frames don't change. Like their feeding times don't really vary based on a lot of different conditions. So you can go out there and really have those windows that you know that they're going to bite. And we'll talk about that later in the podcast, you know, some of the better tides and the better times of year to target them. But I just believe that they're a very, very easy fish to catch. When you're in areas that, you know, there are high populations of them, but, you know, on the Gulf Coast, where there's not, as many. There are still some areas, the 90-10 rule, we can look at the whole Gulf Coast and we can zero in on some spots that there definitely should be some flounder sitting at, just because, like I said, they're a very easy fish to pattern in.
Easy. Even with all the camouflage, they're easy, huh, Wyatt?
Absolutely. They're honestly, I don't think that they're as smart as people make them out to be. They're very aggressive. So it's just a great combination for us fishermen to go fool them with a soft plastic.
Yeah. Well, in general, if your brain can only be what's in between your, kind of your eyes and that, I mean, if you look at their eyes, their brain just can't be that big. It's got to be like the size of not even a pea. I mean, it's just, where does it even sit? I don't know.
It's a scientific fact. I mean,
yeah.
Just look at them.
Yeah, we promised we wouldn't go into science here, but we just did. And they're flat. I mean, it can't be. If look how flat it is, right? I mean, like there's not much in between the head and the eyes. So.
Terrible reasoning. I have a couple flounder stories that just proves, and I totally agree with Wyatt, that I think they're either they're super aggressive or they're dumb. Most likely both. One, I don't get them very much, but I hooked a pretty good sized one here in Tampa, fishing docks, which is where I usually catch them, fishing docks, bouncing a jig on the bottom. I got it. I pulled it like 20 feet from the dock. Had it 5 feet from the boat. It came up, shook its head, and shook off. And flounder, that they're very, obviously they rely on their camo. And so I watched it go down to the bottom. It was a little bit too deep to like see it all the way go down, but I saw it slowly go down. And what they do is they sit, and they're not very smart. They'll sit there. And so I just made a couple casts, and I just bounced it right there, right where the fish I just lost went down. Sure enough, it ate it. And I ended up catching the darn thing. And it just sat there 5 feet from the boat, right after it just ate that lure, and I had to have scared it pretty good because I literally pulled it away from a dock, and it still ate it a second time. And another one was lobster diving down in the Keys. I think you were down there, Joe, that year. I can't remember if you were down there or not. But anyhow, I saw at a lobster hole and went down there, and all of a sudden I see something spook off to my right. It was a flounder, and it went off like 10 feet. I followed it, went up for air, watched it. It thought it was hidden, so it just sat there, and I literally caught it with a lobster net. Like it just sat there thinking that I couldn't see it. And I put a little lobster net, which is only like 1.5 foot, diameter. And it literally just sat there and let me catch it. So they're not smart, and they're super aggressive, and they taste delicious, which is why like pretty much everybody who fishes for them loves them, because it's a great combination. And in that video, by the way, over 40,000 views, Wyatt, right now. I just pulled it up on my second screen.
Wow. In a couple days.
Well done.
So by the time people see this, it'll be a whole lot more. And we'll put a link to that obviously in the show notes at saltstrong.com. Tony, what about you? Where Luke mentioned docks. What are because I want to start a little bit on the where, like best kind of places. Where have you found that you've caught the most flounder?
Right now in the summertime, I personally haven't caught any this summer. They're usually a bycatch for me, but most of the people where I'm at, Central Florida, East Coast, Mosquito Lagoon, Indian River, stuff like that. I see people catching them a lot around the Spoil Islands, some of the creek systems up in the North Mosquito Lagoon, close to, shorelines, soft muddy bottom, mangroves. They typically move inshore in the summertime. Then, they start to get into that winter pattern where they start moving offshore in the wintertime. And that's where you're going to find them a lot around the inlets and the passes around here. They catch some really big flounder, Port Canaveral, Sebastian Inlet down here in Florida in the wintertime, fall into wintertime.
I'm guessing this is another scientific theory that due to Tony's new glasses and how smart he appears, that usually smart people that wear glasses attract other smart people into their circle. Flounder, being dumb with their pea-sized brain, just don't like Tony. That's probably why you haven't caught one this summer. I'm just guessing.
Your reasoning is all over the place today.
No, it's very congruent if you rewind and listen. It's very, very congruent. So
my buddy catches them almost every trip when we go to some of the same areas. I don't know.
Huh. And so what is he using? What kind of lure or bait?
He uses paddle tails. Catches them all sorts of different colors: white, pink, orange, brown.
Slam shady.
That's what I've noticed too. A lot of people catch flounder on very odd colors, like nuclear chicken, orange and pink colors, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think they're not very picky when it comes to color, because I've played around with so many different colors. I think the two big drivers for lures, and we'll talk about tackle later after we do the spot selection, but I'll touch on this really quickly. I really don't think that they care too much about color. The biggest things is the profile of the bait, and the action that it gives off, and if possible, smell. They have pretty big olfactory systems. If you look at a flounder's nostrils, a lot larger than a trout's, almost as big as a redfish's. Some of the bigger ones have similar size nostrils.
Hold on, Wyatt. I got to Google, what does olfactory mean? Every time he brings up this big word.
It's their sense of smell. Your nose is connected.
What does olfactory mean?
It's how they smell, we'll talk about this later on, which is very important to have this. I think, and it's my personal opinion, for those of you who can't see this right now or listening to it on the podcast, it's the ProCure Flounder Pounder. I really think that, it's important to have some scent on your lures for flounder, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But I know we're on spot selection, as Tony touched on. What's that?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's best spots.
Yeah.
What types of areas have you found? And you can pull up a map if you want to as well. Not your best flounder spots, but if they're that easy to catch, you probably should.
Yeah. So kind of the big thing to think about, before you start wanting to target them is what time of the year is it? Because they are, as Tony mentioned, a migratory species. They move around all throughout the year based on different temperatures, and kind of the big two are spring and fall. They hold offshore in the wintertime. That's where they spawn. That's where you're going to catch the biggest ones, in those reefs that are a little bit further offshore, especially on the East Coast. I don't know too much about the West Coast migration patterns, but if you can find any nearshore reefs and you can jig there with bucktails, you can catch some really big flounder. That's where they catch a lot of citation size up over here, is those nearshore reefs, because that's where the spawning ones are. Now, in the spring, they move back in to the inshore areas because the water's warming up and there's a lot more bait fish in the marshes. So there's just more food for them to get. And those smaller flounder don't have to worry about larger predators offshore. And, they grow in size. And then the same thing happens in the fall. They migrate right back out. Now, the cool thing is they all migrate through inlets and passes. So it becomes very easy to dial in on where they're going to be. Coming up, fall's right around the corner. If you're wanting to catch some really big flounder, like Tony said, that's probably the best time of year, because you've got big flounder that are going to be, moving in and out. And it's just very easy to get some. And there are going to be some residential fish that are there all throughout the year in the marshes, or some that stay offshore all year. But, 90% of species are going to migrate in and out. So, those inlets are great because they're choke points. And when we talk about pretty much any of the spots that we're going to find flounder on this podcast, it's 90% of the time going to be a choke point, an area that current is going to be bringing bait through a funnel point. It might be two oyster bars that are close together where there's a thin little stream of current that's bringing bait through, just because, like, you think about a flounder's anatomy, they lay right on the bottom. They're camouflaged. They don't spook off very easily because they don't think that things can see them. Like Luke with his lobster net, you can come right up on those things. I've rolled over a spot in my kayak and casted back behind me right where I just was, and I pulled one up. So they hold in one area specifically where that flow of current is, because they want a conveyor belt of food. That bait that's getting brought around that structure. I love oyster bars and points for flounder because bait likes to congregate in those areas. And then the moment the tide changes, specifically, on outgoing tides, I like to find a lot of flounder because they like to sit in the creek mouths here in the Carolinas and Florida. I'm sure you could pick them off on incoming tides even better. But same thing with outgoing tides as well. But outgoing tides here is great because we've got large creek systems. So they just sit right in the middle of a creek mouth that might have an oyster bar near it, and they wait for that bait to come to it. So it's a very easy spot to pick out on a satellite map, as opposed to trout or snook that might be holding right in the middle of a channel just because there's a little piece of relief right there or something. Flounder, I just think they're so easy visually to be seeing where you're fishing. I need to bring my bait right next to that creek mouth, right next to that oyster bar. And it just makes the fishing really fun because a lot of times they'll hit the first time you roll something past them. Most flounder I catch are on my first cast to an area. So they're pretty easy to pattern in terms of spots.
What about bridges?
Just because I'm in a kayak, I have not gotten a chance to do that myself, but I know a lot of people have really good success. The state record flounder here in the Carolinas, I'm gonna give you guys away the best spot here in the Carolinas is Snow's Cut. It's a thin canal that's cut between the Intercoastal Waterway and the Cape Fear River over here in the Carolinas. And there's some bridges that run through it. And you can go out there and catch citation size flounder all day if you've got a boat. I can't get out there in my kayak. I've been wanting to do some shore fishing there, but they pull some massive flounder out of there and they sit right behind the pilings of those bridges. Like I said, they're looking for an area that they can have bait brought to them and ambush that bait. So they'll hold down current of that piling. And as that bait comes with a outgoing or incoming tide, you know, those flounder are just sitting there waiting for the bait to come right around that piling, and they pop up and they grab them with that upward hinging jaw and those really sharp teeth.
What does a citation mean in North Carolina? What size?
So a citation, unfortunately, they don't do them by length; they do it by weight. And you know, you have to weigh it in at a weigh station. Unfortunately, you have to kill the fish to get it sighted. But it's a 6-pound flounder, I believe. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me in the show comments. But I believe it's a 6-pound flounder here in the Carolinas, and it could be different in different states. I'm not exactly sure if Florida even has citations for certain fish, but here in the Carolinas, it's 6 pounds. That's around the doormat range, and you'll see that happen about the 23 to 24 inch range of flounder. But it just kind of differs on how much they've been eating. If it's not been eating a lot, because they do it on weight, but that 23, 24 is usually where you get that 6 pounds.
It's a big flounder.
It is. Yeah.
Then again, you got guys like John Skinner, you know, who were he was part of that first flounder course, and he's talking about 10 pounders. I'm just like, and that's like when he gets serious. He actually gets excited on the videos when he gets a 10 pounder. Like 7 pounders, like, eh.
Yeah, I watched one video. He caught multiple 10 pounders in one trip. Like,
I got that 12 pounder, right? And then like a 12 and a 10 back to back. It was like, whoa.
Yeah, he was like letting go like 8 pounders because he was like at his limit. It was insane. Like he has it dialed in more than anybody I've ever seen.
He would say that a 7 pounder is a fluke. Oh boy.
Well, they are two different species. You got summer and southern flounder. That's
it was a joke. As a fluke, like, hey, you know.
Well, we got it.
I didn't think I was gonna have to explain myself on that.
We understood. Yeah, and it's interesting here in St. Pete. Like I've been fishing Tampa Bay for a while. I lived in Tampa Bay, which is the further inland part of Tampa Bay, for 4 years, and rarely caught any flounder. And when I did, they were small. And I moved here to St. Pete probably 6 months ago, and I've actually been catching a decent amount. I'll go like feast or famine. I'll catch nothing or I'll catch multiple. And even like last month, it was weird that I caught 5 in one. I just went out after work before dark, and I was fishing these docks. I catch almost all the biggest flounder in Central Florida, East and West Coast. I've caught them fishing docks. They seem to really like to hang around dock pilings. Bridge pilings as well are excellent. Like any sort of structure that's hard structure and has sand next to it and current flow and is at least 5 feet deep is flounder zone, I think. But just last month, middle of the summer, I got 5 flounder, all keeper size, all like none were citations, but I mean, all of them were, the smallest one was 14, the biggest one was 18 inches. And I was bouncing slam shady paddle tails on a jig head, my favorite dock fishing lure, and they were hammering it. And I was fishing in a pass on an incoming tide. And they weren't holding by the dock pilings. I for whatever reason, I just made a cast a little bit deeper, and I caught one. And then I was casting like 20 feet away from the docks in about 10 to 12 feet of water, bouncing this thing on the bottom, and they were hammering it. And then I was like, oh man, I've got the flounder spot. I'm pumped. You know, I was going to be eating flounder all summer long. I went back 2 days later, nothing. And I've tried it now. I've gone back there so many times, not like none. So it was just like it was a fluke.
Huh. Oh, yeah. Why? Did you know there's difference between a fluke and a flounder? So what kind of area, if you could only pick one type of area, since you do have them more dialed in than anyone else on this call, what you mentioned, like creek mouths, was that your kind of go-to spot? And then what tide as well?
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead and give you my 2 spots based on incoming and outgoing, because those are 2 different, you know, I can't just give you one spot that I would say performs better than the other. It's just going to be dependent on tide, and you really have to pick your spots based on tide. You could have an incoming tide spot that, you know, you catch a lot of flounder at a different tide level. You're not going to catch any flounder there. They're really going to look for those areas where they have maximum flow of bait coming towards them. They're looking for the best conveyor belt. So on an outgoing tide, any creek mouth that is emptying out from an area that would be probably dry at low tide, we've got big swings here on the East Coast, in the mid-Atlantic. So if you're in South Carolina, Georgia, any of those coastal marsh areas, and you're listening to this, even at areas in Jacksonville as well, as that tide's coming out of one of those little shallow coves or bays, all that bait's going to be coming out with it as well. So those flounder are going to be sitting right in the direct flow of that current. So if you can find where that little cove is dumping out, so they will be sitting on one side of that creek mouth. It just depends on where that current's coming out of. So if it's, the inlet is over to your right and that current is flowing out, it's going to be the right side of the creek mouth where most of those flounder are going to be sitting. Typically, they'll be sitting right behind the point, or they'll be sitting right in the very middle of the creek mouth. It just kind of depends on whether there's a big kind of shelf of relief. And by relief, I mean, a depth change that they can sit. They're very flat, and they'll just sit somewhere where, they can pop up and those fish wouldn't have seen them until they were right over them. So just, with outgoing tides, I love creek mouths and I love points. On incoming tides, in fact, I have a video that I'll show you guys. This is my number one incoming tide spot.
Ooh,
I'll go ahead and
now we're talking.
the video off here. This is going to give you guys that are listening on the podcast a reason to watch. I'm sure I'm muted. So you've got, this is, an intercoastal channel right here. The current's coming in, incoming tide. You've got an oyster bar over here. You can see it's a pretty thin little channel going into a marsh. So this is the first area that the intercoastal comes into the marsh, just bouncing a paddle tail, just a 4-inch diesel minnow, and, got hooked up. And I'll fast forward just a little bit so you guys can see this fish. And one big thing, you'll probably see it in the video, they hate nets. So whenever you try to land flounder, you really need to be careful, especially if you're keeping their head up above water. They'll shake and you can lose those fish really easily. So you can see he hopped out of the net, and there you go. They're just right there on the paddle tail. They love that bait fish style lure, and you can just put it right in those high probability zones. Have I stopped sharing my screen now? We good?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, just put it in areas that on incoming tide, especially coming off intercoastal waterways, find that piece of structure that those flounder are going to sit behind because they know bait's going to congregate to it. So the other side of that little, I guess it wasn't necessarily new. It was a little pass into a marsh. It had no structure on it. That other side had an oyster bar. There was some other species there as well, but flounder were just holding a little bit down current of that oyster bar, and it's so easy to pick them off. You just have to know where that tide is flowing and where it's going to be bringing bait to.
Cool. And you mentioned on that video you did paddle tails. You mentioned that a few times. Is that what you start with? Is that kind of your search bait for flounder?
Absolutely. I would say, and you can fish paddle tails, and I don't have the one that I was using in that video. This is the one that I was using in the video for big flounder. So if you want to catch numbers with paddle tails, I'd go with, a 4-inch, maybe like a 3.5, like the Slam Shitty 2.0 to a 4-inch diesel minnow. That's your lure to catch the most flounder. If you're looking for flounder that are specifically above, the 18 20s and upper 20s range, that 5-inch paddler Z is what you want, because those bigger flounder, they are dialed in. I mean, all flounder are dialed in on bait fish imitations. They will hit shrimp lures. Just make sure you're using big shrimp lures, like those 4-inch gulp shrimp. Those work really well. Just jigging those off the bottom, double twitch paws. But I find that flounder will hit a paddle tail imitation way more than they will a shrimp imitation. If you look at the way that their mouth is designed, it's designed to come up. They've got very sharp teeth that, you don't need that for shrimp. You look at a drum's mouth, they've got crushers. It's just a big bar of basically jawbone. But flounder are dialed in on those bait fish because they have the sharp teeth just to get a good hold of them. So if you want bigger flounder, use a bigger paddle tail. If you want more flounder, use, that 4-inch. That way, you'll get more strikes. But make sure you're using a heavy jig head. I can say with a 1/4 ounce jig head, you can cover about any situation. Probably 6 feet to 10 feet would be the deepest I would go with that. And then you want to start using something heavier, maybe even a bucktail with one of those trailers on it. This is what the guys in New Jersey and New York use the most of, and we can touch on that in a second. But shallow water, I might even put on a weedless hook, and I've had them nail the owner twist locks with some Z-Man soft plastics as well, if I know that there's a lot of weeds or anything or grass around. But yeah, just those paddle tails, they're great because you can fish them fast to search an area really quickly. If you feel that there is a lot of flounder in an area, typically when you find ones that are under that 16, 18 inch range, if you find them in that range, there's probably a lot of them in one zone. I'll catch 3, 4, 5 flounder at one creek mouth, and then move on down to the next one and do the same exact thing over again. They like to congregate. When they get bigger, typically you won't catch more than one in the same zone just because I don't know if they get territorial or what, but they, you can just pick them off really easy with those paddle tails in summary.
Do you use jerk shads too? I know, we've caught quite a few big ones on both gulp jerk shads and our Alabama leprechaun. What are your thoughts there, Wyatt?
So if it's like, really, really calm, yes, I will, because you don't want to over vibrate the area, I guess, with these paddle tails. They're great because, flounder are holding in current, but if you're further back in the creeks and there's not a whole lot of current, or you're in an area like where Tony is, and I learned a lot from Tony watching his videos and him picking up flounder with those jerk shads, just because he's in the calmer Mosquito Lagoon area. And it's just a more natural presentation. But again, that twitch, pause, just because those flounder, they're sitting on the bottom, they're looking up, they're not looking forward. So having vertical movements with your lure, and jerk shads are great for that because they create a lot of action in such a small space, and then they settle right back down to the bottom. It gives those flounder a lot of time to pop up and just grab it. The longer you can stay in their strike zone, the better. And just because their vision is, facing up, the more vertical movements you can make with your lure, the better it is. Because if you just zip across really quickly with a paddle tail and the flounder's sitting, right here, he's got very little time to grab that lure. But jerk shads can work great if you're in a calmer zone. Tony, I know you've caught quite a few flounder on those jerk shads. You want to touch on that a little?
Yeah, when I'm using the jerk shad, it's just a matter of, like you said, keeping that bait on the bottom. So I'll go a little heavier with the weight. If not, put it on a jig head just like you would a paddle tail. Because like you said, flounder, they're not going to travel very far to go after something. And the longer you can keep your lure in the strike zone, the better. And what you were saying about how, doing a straight retrieve isn't too productive. There's actually a video out there. I don't know if you guys seen it. This flounder is sitting in like maybe 5 or 6 inches of water right on the shoreline. This guy rips a paddle tail right by it, and it snatched it in like blink of an eye. It was super quick. So again, just keeping your bait close to the bottom, close to those fish. If that paddle tail was, 2 or 3 feet above that fish, he'd probably just let it go right by.
Yeah, that's what's cool about, Skinner's videos, getting to see how these flounder actually behave and feed and attack. I mean, I think a lot of people just consider, oh yeah, they're just kind of sitting on the bottom. They're kind of lazy. I mean, and not to say they're super active, but when they see something go by them, they smash it. It is crazy how aggressive those fish are. Nuts. So what else, Wyatt? What else in terms of lures? It sounds like paddle tails, bucktails were a big thing that came up on Skinner's course, and he even has his own line of bucktails. What else?
Yeah, I didn't really touch on bucktails too much, but they're great, especially if you're trolling. With paddle tails, I feel like they're not the best trolling bait because you're hitting waves and things like that. And up in Skinner's area, as he's going and trolling those, I don't know if they're continental shelves or what, but he's out really far.
Trolling or drifting?
Yeah, he does a lot of drift.
Drifting, right? He's just drifting with the current. He's vertical fishing.
I think in his video, it was a mix of both, but I know when he was drifting, it was just a lot of up and down. And then there was a little bit of him moving around with trolling, and he just kind of would let it sit, and it would kind of go through really slow, and you'd get over this flounder and you'd see him follow it for a while. And, the moment that it dropped a little bit, you'd see him come up and grab it just because I don't know what it is, but just a change in movement vertically, I find, and you can watch his videos, those flounder will come up and smack it. The moment it changes, it goes a little bit lower. Sometimes even it starts to go a little bit higher. Maybe they think it's starting to go away. They'll come up and smack it. But I would say outside of paddle tails, buck tails, maybe some gulp shrimp on a really heavy jig head, just again, because it's matching that vertical movement. But I would rather stick with those bait fish imitations if it was me. The gulp swimming mullet, again, it's not necessarily a paddle tail, kind of is. It's got that curly tail on it. I know a lot of guys will rig up the Skinner rigs, which is, a tandem rig. You've got two lures, I guess jig heads, that are on one string of leader, and you can catch two flounder at the same time. Like I said, sometimes you'll find those smaller ones hanging together, and you can pick them off with that tandem rig, two with one stone.
Cool.
I was going to say a pretty popular rig over here on the East Coast is a heavy bucktail jig, especially in the inlets and the passes, is a heavy bucktail jig with about a 4 or 5 inch, like you said, the Berkeley swimming mullet, that curly tail grub. Seems to be the ticket over here on the East Coast if you're fishing deep.
Deadly. What about tides? You kind of touched on it earlier. That are you finding that flounder, clearly you want some kind of current, but have you ever caught them like it just slack tide when just nothing's moving?
So it's funny. A lot of times I'll see on slack tide right in the middle of a flat when, there's only, if it's bottom of low tide, this is my favorite time to see this activity. Typically I'm just waiting on redfish to come onto a flat when this is happening, but it'll be the bottom of low tide, just a couple inches of water. I can't get them to hit lures, but I'll see that they're active on bait. What I mean by that is, there's only a couple of inches of water that's there, and I'll see these small bait schools moving around, and it's slack tide. So it's either still going out a little bit or it's coming in, it's just starting to, and those flounder are coming up out of the water. Like they're going completely airborne. And I had videos, I believe I've cleared my SD card since then, but you'll see them come clear out of the water a couple feet after that bait because they shoot off the bottom so fast. I've not caught any on artificials. I've caught some at slack tide in deeper creeks. I haven't picked any off that I've seen going airborne like that, but I know some guys that have actually caught them on top water during those times. Judd Brock, who's one of our coaches, was using wake baits and it was a pretty big flounder on a top water. And it just came straight out of the water on it. Not the type of lure I would recommend for flounder. That's a very unique scenario, but yeah, I would say you could probably catch them at slack tide with live bait. If I had to take a guess, maybe mud minnows, small finger mullet, possibly even a live shrimp. If you know where they are, any kind of depressions on those flats, just near the inflow outflow points, that'd be where I would be looking. I wouldn't say slack tide would be a big time frame. I would be looking just like right when that current starts coming, or right when it starts to go outgoing, or at the very bottom of outgoing, or very end of incoming. Any time that there's good current flow, that's where I'd be looking.
Cool. Luke, Tony, anything on
that? Yeah, no, I think as far as current goes, make sure the water's moving, just like what I said. Either the bottom or if you break the tide up into like thirds, the first third, the middle third, and then the end, the last third, that's usually the end is going to be the strongest of the current.
Yeah, I just think get a lure in front of their face, and they're aggressive fish. So I've definitely caught some. I used to fish Sebastian a lot, and the current there is so strong where that middle third period is really hard to fish. The current's just cranking. So in some places where it's especially inlets where the water's moving just so fast it's hard to fish, you're like forced to fish around the slacks. And so in Sebastian, I used to fish that a lot, and I'd be throwing these jig heads. The game changer for me is that the flounder were almost always holding right near the rocks. And so you can lose a lot of jigs if you're not careful. So what I started doing is using these weedless jig heads. There's a lot of different types. This one is made by Z-Man. We have them in our store, and that's a game changer because now you can bounce it along the bottom right in their face, and then you can get right next to the rocks, which is where the fun are most often going to be without the risk of getting snagged. Obviously, these still do snag sometimes, but not nearly as much as a normal jig head. So if you're doing passes, especially like Sebastian Inlet is a very popular pass or popular inlet. And around November, some big ones are going to start showing up. That's when I used to fish it. And they're there. Again, almost all of them are going to be on the sandy patches, but right next to the rocks. So you're going to lose some jigs when you're feeling for the rocks. If you're new to an area, even if you're not new to an area, but especially if you're new to the area, use a weedless jig so that you can, in a good sensitive rod, so you can feel the bottom. Okay, there's structure. There's cast a little bit further out. There's no structure. Keep casting right there. Cast right up along those rocks. Sometimes you have to get right in their face. So do multiple casts when you can find that structure line. And as long as the current's not too fast to fish it, you can catch some good flounder.
And speaking of November, if you happen to live in Florida, as of this year, 2020, they're trying to change the regulations for flounder, and they'll actually be closed for recreational fishermen in November if it goes through. They're also changing the bag limit from 10 to 5 fish per person for recreational, and the size limit from 12 inches to 14 inches for recreational. So I'm not sure if they have actually passed that through yet, but if they do, just keep an eye on your regulations. Make sure you're following them.
And what did they do in the Carolinas that made everyone so mad?
Yeah, so we had a full closure on flounder for the last year. So you could.
Oh, that's a fluke.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you could not keep flounder at all, southern or summer. Speaking of fluke, so it's funny to me that you guys say that you guys have a 12-inch. That's the minimum size for flounder. Wow.
Yeah, right now they're trying to change it to 14.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's either 14 or 15 here. I've never kept a flounder, so I wouldn't know. But you have not been able to keep flounder for the past year here. The commercial fishermen, looking at the data, we've been over harvesting them. Recreational anglers harvest like 5% of what the commercial guys are doing. But they had
so that makes sense that you guys should penalize the recreational guys then.
Yeah, this is a whole nother podcast conversation that I could get into. But to not go down that road, we've had it closed. They just opened it up for a month. So we've got it opened up last Sunday, which is why that video went live, to kind of help some folks get on some big flounder. But we've got a full month up until, I believe it might be September. I can't remember if it's September 16th or 30th. Don't quote me on that, but make sure you check your regs before you listen to me. But you can keep them for a whole month. And we have not been able to do that all year. So that's why everyone's been excited. And, there's been some really nice flounder that have been caught. Someone caught a 10-pounder not too far from me. And that's just, that's a great fish to have here in the Carolinas. These fish get pretty big here, and we've got some great potential. Unfortunately, we've not been doing a great job of managing the resource here. So hopefully that will improve here in the future. And, we don't have to close a season if it's properly managed.
Cool. Talk about retrieve. You guys have both kind of touched on it. What you've mentioned, keeping on the bottom, pop. What's your go-to?
Yeah, sorry.
What'd you just sit there?
I just ran my rod into the fan. Hopefully it didn't break the tip. But with your rod, so I've started to actually favor a split grip when I'm going after flounder. And honestly, the biggest thing I can say is have a light reel, light line, and a rod that you're comfortable making finesse movements with. This is not a straight retrieve you're doing. This is a twitch pause. So what you're doing is you've got the palm of your wrist, you're driving it into your rod handle, and you're just making little movements at double twitch pause. So you're pop and let it sit, reel down the slack. You don't want to have any slack in your line, because the moment that you do, you're not going to be able to feel that flounder strike, because they don't move off with it. They slam that lure. It's a really hard thump. And if you're using that light sensitive line, a light reel, and you've got, a good counterweighted rod, your rod tip will actually dive down. You'll feel that strike all throughout your really sensitive line. I know when a flounder hits, because they hit so hard and then they don't run off. They go right back down to the bottom. So then all you got to do is make sure your line's tight and just give a decent hook set. You don't want to drive it home, because there is a very thin part of their mouth that is in the corner. And if you rip too big of a hole, as they shake their head, that's why we see most flounder get loose. Like Luke was talking about, it got up to the top, shook its head. You want to try to make sure that when you're retrieving, to double twitch pause, reel down, keep that line tight, and then give it a decent hook set. You don't want to Bill dance it, but just giving it a good enough hook set to drive it home. But again, just twitch pause, keep that line tight, and make sure you let it sink to the bottom.
Excellent. What are some, go for it, Tony.
I was going to say, wanted to touch too on how you're getting into landing the flounder, keeping your rod tip down, keep that flounder's head in the water. And I can't emphasize how important it is to have a net with you. I was on a party boat. This was 9-10 years ago. And I had caught, it had to be at least 9 or 10 pound flounder, had it up on the surface. The guy told me, all right, let some line out, let it stay just under the surface. And one of the deckhands, he went and got a gaff instead of a net. And he ran around to me, tried to gaff it, flounder flipped over, came off, swam away. And all the other deckhands were just ragging them the whole trip about trying to gaff that flounder. So make sure you have a net.
Yeah, I can 110% second that. My landing ratio with flounder went up probably 80% when I bought a net. And Tony, you did a great review on those. I think they're forever last Gen 2 landing nets. If you're in a kayak or in a boat, I think those things are great. And they've got that good mesh on them, the rubber mesh, but they will flip around. So the moment that you get them, make sure you sit them in your boat and you turn the net over on them, because they will come out of that net. If you watch that video that I just showed, and we'll link it in the show notes, it's actually the best spots for flounder. It goes more into the spot selection. But in that video, I had a flounder, netted him, put him in my kayak, and I just had the net open face sitting in the bottom of my kayak, literally flipped straight out of the net and back into the water. And I had to fight them all over again. So they'll flounder away. They're slippery guys, and you got to make sure that you got them under control.
Oh, what a fluke. What a fluke. And Tony, is
on the net thing too? I want to add that's an important thing, because this flounder, it's almost like a trout, but like times 10 as far as how fast they can shake their head. And so as soon as they get that head out of the water and start doing their shake, that's when they get off. And what both of them said with the net, very important to keep your rod down and have a net ready, ideally somebody else with you, and don't let that net break the surface so that they can't see it. And then as soon as their head comes out of the water, slide that net underneath them. It'll significantly increase, because as soon as they get their head out of the water, they're going to get off, and you need to have that net under their head as soon as they break the surface. If you put the net in there while the flounder's under it, they can see it, then it starts freaking out and it might even jump away from the boat. So it's ideally you have somebody with you. It's really hard to do by yourself because you have to manage the net and the flounder at the same time. And those big ones, they get away a lot right at the boat because they just go ballistic. They actually don't even, in many cases, they don't fight all that well until they're like right underneath you. And then they just start going ballistic. So it's a thrill, but it's a heartbreak when the big one gets off, because it's not only you don't have the story, you caught the giant, plus they're delicious. Like it's like the ultimate downer when you have like so I feel for you, Tony. I've never had one that big get away, but I've had some good ones, and it's so painful.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Tony, if this guy is still on your hit list. You guys see Tony, he looks so reserved, but the guy, I mean, he's jacked like crazy. And I just envision Tony having this little hit list like behind his desk somewhere where he marks the name off. And like every time he's bench pressing 325, he's like 9-pound flounder, 9-pound flounder.
The guy's picture is probably on his bench press bar where he's looking at it. I'm going to get you.
He doesn't work on that boat anymore, I don't think. I haven't seen him out there. I've been on it a few times afterwards.
He's still looking for him.
He sleeps with the fishes.
That's good stuff. Well, cool. Anything else you can think of, Wyatt? Any other good questions that I know you and Tony both do a good job of doing separate videos, just addressing some of the questions, but any other questions that came from that video that you're like, oh, wow, this could be its own separate video?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've already done. One of the big things I saw was, do you guys use Procure, Flounder, Pounder, XYZ? And the answer is yes, 100%. Like I said with Flounder earlier, I really think that smell is a big factor for them, especially because they're holding down current. So if you really want to prime those fish to feed, these lures I was using, they came pre-scented. But if I'm using, some of the diesel minnows that aren't scented already, I'll throw some of this Flounder Pounder on them. And it's made with, real fish parts, pieces of menhaden, pieces of other bait fish, oils, things like that. So you throw it up current, and as you're retrieving it through that little conveyor belt, as I've called it, that scent is coming down current, and those fish, they know something's about to come to them. They're getting ready to feed. So I believe that really, if you want to give yourself an edge, I'm not saying this is going to help you catch 100% more flounder. I don't think that it hurts to have the scent, though, especially considering those fish are sitting in current, you're priming them to feed, or, they might be just a little bit out of position. They pick up that scent. As you see in those Skinner videos, they might move a little bit and get ready to be in that direct flow where they can pick off your bait, even if you don't put it in the exact right spot. So I think that, go ahead and give your bait some scent. We absolutely use, I use Procure. I know Luke's not a huge fan of the scents. Tony, I don't know about you. Do you use Procure when you're going after flounder?
Yeah, flounder, redfish, and drum seem to be big on scent. Trout.
Don't let Luke fool you. He always has ProCure on the boat just in case.
Yeah, I've never been. I still use it. It feels nice. I've just done that. I have done some tests where I go out with a scented lure, unscented lure, same exact lure, same rod, same reel, same line, same everything. And so far, the times I've tested a scent versus a no scent, there really hasn't been much of a difference. Like it's not noticeable, but it feels better to have that. Like I definitely don't think this scent. I would never say that scent would be harmful unless it was like gasoline, like a bad scent. But like an actual natural fish scent, it probably does help. It definitely doesn't hurt. Just so far, like I wish I could say that the tests so far have actually shown that it does work. It hasn't shown that it doesn't, but I can't say from the test so far that there's been a difference. I've only done one test on ProCure, and ProCure is the one that I go for. I did one on Cashels, if I'm saying it right. I don't know. But I did that 3 different times, and there was really no difference. I actually caught a little bit more. It was mostly snook. They didn't seem to care, and actually caught a little bit more snook on the non-scented versus the scented. But again, in no case did one catch fish and the other one didn't catch fish. It was probably just whatever lure happened to come across their face situation.
It's kind of like your whole haircut deal right now. If you guys can't see, look, he hasn't cut his hair this year, and he's been catching more fish. We've now surpassed 15,000 insiders. Like Luke's got a great girlfriend. Like life's pretty good.
Can't stop now.
Yeah, would it be good with the short hair? I don't know. Maybe not. Who knows? Yeah. He might be horrible. He might be in prison right now for all we know. But doggone, things are going pretty doggone well with his long hair. I say let it grow. What would Elsa say from Frozen 2? You know, let it grow. Or is it let it go? We go back and watch that movie with my kids. Great flick. Wyatt, have you seen that?
Yeah, I've watched it with
Tony.
My nieces and nephews have babysitted.
Right. Yeah. Tony,
I have not.
Oh, right.
No, good job, Tony.
Luke, have you?
I've seen it. Yeah, I saw it with your kids.
Oh, really? It's Frozen 2, huh? Just got out of the theaters last week. It's interesting, and I didn't remember seeing you there.
The guys with the beards are watching Frozen.
Yep. 2 out of 3 single guys at Salt Strong watch Frozen 2. That's going to be the headline of this video. And they love Flounder. All right, guys. This has been super helpful. Anything else, Wyatt, besides some scent?
I think maybe the last thing I touch on is live bait, just really quickly. I would say, again, biggest thing is you want to use bait fish. I know some guys will pick them up using live shrimp, but what I've seen, and I've heard a lot, but from what I've seen, live croakers and live finger mullet. You put those on Carolina rigs, you put them in areas where you've got that current and that the circular, I don't want to use too big of words. Yeah. Circular weight is going to roll along the bottom in those high current areas. It's going to allow that live bait to move with the current. It's not going to be pinned to the bottom on a pyramid sinker, and it's going to roll towards those flounder, and that bait's going to be moving around a lot. Typically, larger flounder will be caught on larger bait fish. So the croakers, I've seen big flounder caught on big croakers, and I've seen big flounder caught on big mullet. I just went out with Judd Brock, and we were fishing in a high current area near an inlet, and what do you know? Caught a big flounder. It was over 20 inches on a mullet that was probably 5-6 inches long. It was a pretty solid sized mullet. So just I would say Carolina rigs. That would be my go-to with live bait. Make sure you're using big bait fish.
Yeah, one thing we need to talk about is hook set too. There's been, I think that's at least in my opinion, there's a misconception out there that you have to wait. I've heard a lot of people teach that you feel the strike, you think it's a flounder, wait like 5-10 seconds, like a long time to set the hook. And I personally haven't seen, especially watching Skinner's stuff where he's filming the flounder actually coming up and striking lures. Like they're not like nibbling at it. They're hammered, like they're eating it and sucking it down fast. So I think waiting is probably doing more harm than good personally. Why, have you seen that too?
Oh, I completely agree. When I was talking about using light line and having that sensitive rod tip, you will feel them thump it. They are not sitting there chewing on it like a black drum nibbles on stuff. They are sucky. Like just watch it. Some of that underwater footage from that tip that we talked about at the beginning of this video, I included some. They come up and they hit it just as hard as a trout. Like they they are so aggressive. And I set the hook, I just make sure I have tight. I want to have that tautness in my line, and I want to get that good hook set. That's the only reason I take any kind of pause, is just to make sure my line's tight, because they do have some bony areas further back in their mouth. So I don't know whether I'm on that thin lining or I'm in the, or I'm in the further back areas of their mouth that, you really need to get a good hook set. So I just give it a medium power hook set every time, just enough, raise my rod tip 45 degrees, but I'm not waiting, any time whatsoever as soon as my line's tight to set that hook.
And even with that big mullet too, right?
Correct. Yeah. Typically you're using circle hooks there, so you're not setting a hook. You want to reel down. Like they're just inhaling that fish. So you just want to reel down immediately.
Cool. Super helpful.
Honestly, mud minnows down here in Florida, that seems to be a top choice too for live bait.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And in Sebastian, that I used to catch a lot of mullet, like little finger mullet, and obviously mullet, if you throw them out free line, they're just going to stay on the surface. And so get a split shot or something about like 8 inches below it, and just get them by dock piling where they, flounder hanging by, and that thing will get sucked down. But yeah, it's a lot of, I wish we had more of them over here. It's just a whole lot of fun to catch. And it's a whole lot of fun to bring home for dinner. They are delish.
Absolutely. Cool, guys. This has been a great one, fun one. We appreciate everyone. If you made it this far, a couple of new things coming up. We have a lot of inventory headed our way. It's been just a chaotic, really 3 or 4 months for any company in the fishing tackle industry. You've got all this massive amount of people who have been boating and fishing, and then you have all these manufacturing plants who have been shut down and can't even keep up with all the demand. I mean, it literally it's been chaotic. I mean, we have some orders that have been pending since February. I mean, we're talking 6 months now have passed, and we still haven't gotten some of these orders in. Good news is it seems like a lot of these manufacturing groups are catching up. So you'll see our shop page, including a lot of the lures we talked about today and rigs, will be on there, and a lot of new stuff coming very, very soon at fishstrong.com. Then, of course, join us in the Insider Club if you haven't already. That's saltstrong.com, and you can go click on the top button right there in orange. It says join the Insider Club. You can learn more there. You'll understand quickly why we have 15,000 members. It's all about the how-to, based on real trends, not just, hey, here's because my grandfather taught me, here's how to catch a fish, based on real trends and based on real science. And then, of course, we have the community, which has just been amazing. We've hammered home the power of having a network and having a community of people you can bounce ideas off of and learn from them and see what they're doing right in your backyard, really from Texas up to that New Jersey line. And then, of course, the discounts. So if you're an insider, remember, you get 20% off all the best stuff. We're never going to be, a Walmart. We're never going to be one of these massive big box retailers that has just everything, because half the stuff you just don't need. So we want to focus on the best products and give you, 20% off, give you the absolute best deal and get it out to you super fast. So join us there at saltstrong.com. Join us in the Insider Club. And if you want to learn more, like go really in depth on the Flounder or even the rigging, we have courses as well. That Flounder course was definitely one of our top selling, just because we had an expert in every single state that was coming on and showing the best spots, best times of year, how to fish specific areas based on the local trends. So you can see that. It's saltstrong.com under the products. Other than that, we appreciate you. It helps big time if you do subscribe to us, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're on the iTunes. We do not accept sponsors, as you probably have noticed, for any of our stuff. We do this just to keep it clean, to let you guys know exactly what really works and what doesn't work. All we ask in return is help us out. Either join the club, and if you just have literally no money, then what are you doing watching this? You should be reading a book or something. But honestly, do join us in the club. And then finally, subscribe to us both on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. Guys, we're out. Everyone's beard looking great right now. Luke, hair looking awesome. Have you used any product at all?
No product, dude. All
Wow.
natural, man. This doesn't happen with some crazy chemicals.
Well, I was about to say, it looked really natural. It looks great.
Here, if you put ProCure in there, it helps it
Ooh.
fill in the patches.
Now maybe that's why I haven't. Maybe that's why I haven't seen a difference when I'm using it. I haven't put it on my beard. Jeez.
That would be good, is actually load up your beard with ProCure and then take a GoPro underwater and hold your breath and see if the fish will act like the little bait fish, and maybe sheep's head will come right up to you.
Never know.
Yeah, it's like, this guy looks like a tree hugger. He's not into fishing.
Great styling gel too.
We're safe as can be with this guy. Then they realize it's Luke from Salt Strong. We're screwed. We're out of here. All right, guys. Thank you so much for all the support, all the love. We be out. Peace.
Later.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.